Hey everyone, welcome back to the neighborhood. Today we're taking a look at the Moondrop SSP. So I really like the SSR for the price, and these are supposed to be their bassier, fuller sounding cousins. So does the SSP make the grade and live up to expectations? Let's get into it. So the look and the build of the SSP is oh so similar to the SSR. So I'm not really going to cover that here for the most part, so if you're interested in that, go look at that review. I'll place a link in the description below. There are also some minor differences, like the plastic tip of the 2-pin connectors are see-through rather than frosted, and the plastic used in the cable itself is even slinkier than the second generation SSR. For some reason, the 3.5mm right-angled termination is still of the frosted variety, even despite the rest of the cable being clear. So while it isn't a fancy-looking braided cable like something that might come with a tin hi-fi product, it is nice looking and functioning as a straight cable, even if it might be too slinky in comparison to the second generation SSR cable. Which would still be my preference, but all three iterations of the cables are still very close to one another. Other than the cable, the SSP comes in a matte blue rather than a glossier finish like the updated SSRs. So let's get into the sound. But since I've already covered the SSR in more depth, I will try to keep things here short and sweet. At least for me. Like the build, there is a lot to love here, just like the SSR. But unlike the SSR, the SSP seems like it was created more with a consumer tuning in mind. With regard to the timbre, the SSP is decently darker in tone and more ambient in its general presentation compared to the SSR. And it is important to note that the SSP comes across as mildly veiled to my ears. Relatedly, for some reason the treble in the SSP also seems to fall off markedly early in comparison to that of the SSR, at least acoustically, even though the two earphones graph relatively similar in this region. Mids, on the other hand, were much of the same, as the notably large 3K pentagain peak was retained from the SSR. But even so, the 3K peak of the SSP was still somehow more tolerable to my ears in comparison to its predecessor. For example, on the song Think of Me by the Veronicas, vocals came across as somewhat shouty on both the SSR and the SSP, but was most relaxed on the SSP in comparison. But, in a vacuum, vocals are still mildly forward on the SSP. So, other than the darker tone, the notable takeaway here is that the SSP, with its mids and treble, is markedly the same as the SSR, but mildly more pleasing. The SSP is also warmer, in part because of its bass. Even if it is alternatively less pleasing because of it, rather than more pleasing as in the case of its mids. It is actually the bass of this earphone where things really tend to get muddy. Pun intended. The bass itself is murky, woolly, and somehow at the same time rather one-note sounding. This is a marked departure for the SSR, which had a great bass definition and detail, despite being perceived by some as somewhat limited in its quantity on particular tracks. Pulse is a good description of the bass of the SSP, as it generally lacks dynamics. However, there is a small portion of the frequency response where things become more punchy and produce a pulse-like effect. Outside of this region, the bass is ill-defined, and it warms over the entirety of the sonics of this earphone, as there is notable sub-bass bleed, which is pretty diffuse. To know what I'm speaking of, just listen to the bass lines on Going Bad by Meek Mill and Drake, and Change Your Mind by Tori Kelly to observe the SSP's low-end seepage. With that said, I was surprised to learn that RHA's dual density tips had a positive effect on the SSP. Generally, I find that dual density tips not only smooth out a mid-range, but also increase an earphone's bass response, as it did in the SSR. In the SSP, however, RHA tips seem to tighten the low-end presentation and additionally smooth out the 3K peak. Nevertheless, perhaps because of the intrusive diffuse bass, I felt that separation, imaging, transients, and layering still suffered somewhat in comparison to the SSR. But the SSP is still notably sufficient in these characteristics in comparison to most other $40 earphones in this price range. Markedly, and because of its ambient character, the SSP did excel with both decay in general and in comparison to the SSR. In my SSR review, I claimed that the frequency response and some of its other characteristics reminded me of that of the HD600, and while I still believe that, the SSP has put things in somewhat more of a perspective, as I now think that Moondrop has produced two earphones with tuning similar to that of the Sennheiser HD600 line. But in each case, their tunings are more extreme in their leanings to the dark side or the light side in comparison to that of the Sennheisers. What I'm trying to say is that the SSR reminds me of a slightly more aggressive HD600, while the SSP reminds me of an even muddier HD650. With that said, I wouldn't say that the SSP is a bad earphone either, and my brain does adjust to its poorly defined bass after a few tracks, as I am ultimately still able to enjoy this earphone somewhat. Furthermore, I do like what Moondrop was going for here with the SSP in some regards. I just think that it was somewhat poorly executed in the end, and I had hoped that the final product would have come out better. The SSP just feels markedly less special to me in comparison to the SSR, which was somewhat of a disappointment to me personally. With that said, I would totally understand someone choosing the SSP over the SSR for a more relaxed listen, perhaps as a portable everyday carry, if that was what one was looking for. And just a reminder guys, at the 1,000 subscriber mark, I'll be giving away another set of COS KSC 75s. So make sure to subscribe here, like the video, leave some comments, and follow the neighborhood at all its other access locations, including Twitter, the blog, Instagram, or the Discord. Additionally, there's also a Patreon. The Patreon is only $1.50 a month, and it gets you access to early written blog reviews from me. And with that, I'm out for now.